I have no idea if I just broke 10 Rotary rules by dinging the bell twice, but love the energy in the room. Happy Monday, everyone. So glad to have you here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I believe they are on the tables. Please join me in reciting the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? I welcome Adam Broyne to the stage for our invocation.
So I'll try and keep this to 90 minutes. So Isaiah 61:3, to provide for those who mourn in Zion, to give them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of a praise instead of a faint spirit. They will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord to display his glory. Please join me in prayer. Dear Lord, as we're speaking about mental health today, I just want all of the hearts in this room to extend out to anyone who's hurting, and for us to wish that anyone who is in such a tough space find their roots, find their peace, and find their glory. Amen.
We have a lot of smiling faces in the room today. I would like to invite our guests to please stand along with those who invited them so that we may offer you a warm Rotary welcome. Thank you, guests, for being here today. And I'd like to extend a special welcome to those who are participating in the 437 project. We have some of our runners here today, so glad to have you. Now down to Rotary business. I would like to invite Kayla Etram to the stage to talk about one of the committees.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday. I'm excited to share with you a little bit about the Rotary International Committee, which is a new committee that Dave Easlin and I are co-chairing. Hi, Dave, over there. We are tucking a lot of things under this committee, and Dave will share a few things later this month about some of the things that he has experienced and ways to get involved in the friendship exchange area. But I'm here to talk about the youth programs that we're tucking under the Rotary International Committee. Now, you all see me up here almost every week with the Junior Rotarians. That is back. We are excited to welcome them back with us. That will be a component of that group. We also have the four-way test essay contest, the Rotary Youth Leadership Academy, and Rotary Youth Exchange that we'll be working on over the next couple of years. And we love to have anyone who's excited about working with kids, primarily high school or middle school students, to join us and learn more about it. We have a meeting coming up on August 24th. So if you're interested in learning more about impacting youth in Sioux Falls and how that ties into the international piece and how we're impacting students around the world, I'd love to chat with you more. So thanks for considering.
Well, our Junior Rotarians are certainly one of my favorite parts of every Monday, so I extend the same encouragement that Kayla did to be involved in such a special part of what our club does and offers. We have not one, but two new member inductions today. The first, I'd like to invite Matt Paulson to the stage with his new member.
President Cindy and fellow Rotarians, it is my pleasure to introduce all of you to one of our newest members, Marcus Maitland. Marcus is a fifth-generation South Dakotan that hails from Webster. He's a 2015 graduate of the University of South Dakota. By day, he is a commercial real estate broker for NAI Sioux Falls. He's been married to his wife, Alexis, for about 2 years now. They have a 1-year-old son named Jack, and he is really a shining example of what it looks like to be an emerging leader in our community. He's on a bunch of different boards, including the Harrisburg Economic Development Corporation and the Southeastern Development Foundation Board. He is on the YPN Steering Committee, the Chamber's Issues Management Council, and a whole bunch of other things that I don't remember. Marcus is a good guy, and he'll be a great addition to our club, so please welcome Marcus Maitland.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for sponsoring me. Philanthropy is big for me. I got big into philanthropy when I was in college at USD. I was thinking about this and why do you join organizations like this? And it's to give back. It's to meet people. But it's for that sense of belonging, right? So I appreciate you welcoming me into Rotary downtown. A few other thank yous. Again, thank you, Matt, for sponsoring me. Thank you, Tony Nour, for bringing me back into the Rotary fold. Thank you to Steve Sikorsky, who I know has invited me a few times. Dennis Bresky, Rotarian, who was a big part of bringing me on to NAI Sioux Falls 6-7 years ago now. Look forward to meeting all of you, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'd like to now invite Tony Nour to the stage to introduce our next new member.
Thank you, Cindy, and good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. I have the great pleasure of introducing the new CEO of SDN Communications. Many of us in this room had relationships with Mark Chalanta. He was a longtime Rotarian and someone that was very special to us. Ryan had the opportunity to work alongside Mark for 16, 17 years, learn from him, and stepped into that role in January and is doing a fantastic job with that. In conversations with him, he's involved in the community already, involved across the state. If you haven't got an opportunity to meet him yet, you will. High energy, great leader, and excited to have him part of this club. I'm going to have him come up and tell his story, but please join me in welcoming Ryan Punt to Downtown Rotary.
Good afternoon. As Tony said, my name is Ryan Punt. I'm the CEO at SDN Communications. I've had a great mentor in Mark Chalanta, as Tony alluded to. Mark very much stressed making sure we give back not only in a financial way, but with our times and talents. And so he set the example. He was our visionary, and I'm just excited to take the reins from him and just sprinkle a little bit of my thoughts, but really a lot of what he built at SDN and with our members, our customers, and across the state. I've been blessed with two teenage daughters, my wife and I. My wife of 24 years, she's an educator in the Sioux Falls Public Schools. She's in the literacy program. And Laura B. Anderson, she teaches the SIPS program there. So I'm just very thankful and very happy to get involved with the program and get involved with the Rotary and just provide some of my talents here. So I appreciate Tony for giving me the nudge and bringing me along. So thank you, and I look forward to meeting you all.
Marcus and Ryan, I hope you find it to be a very special time to be a downtown Rotarian. One of the things that I think makes our club as special as it is the kind of programming that we bring, that we really focus on bringing that downtown Rotary is a place where important conversations happen. And today's program certainly fits into that. I'd like to invite Tony Nour back up to the stage, who will be moderating today's program, Responding to the Pressure of Leadership, a look at mental health through a leadership lens. And I'll invite our two other participants to head on stage. While they are making their way, we are joined today by Dr. Matt Stanley. He's a psychiatrist at Avera Behavioral Health and the medical director of the Link and Avera Addiction Care Facility. We are also joined by Matt Jensen, founder partner of Matt Jensen Marketing and 5-4 Training, and CEO of Vance Thompson Vision. I'm beyond grateful to have the three of you on stage with us today. Tony, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, President Cindy, and welcome, Matt and Matt. Great to have you here, and as Cindy mentioned, it's an important conversation. We've had conversations like we did last October when we talked about the complexities of suicide. We thought coming out of what we hope is coming out of the pandemic and leading, we had an opportunity to lead through that. Now we're getting an opportunity to lead out of that. We've been through a lot as a community, as leaders, and just to have a conversation about that, what that impacts that has on our family and those around us that care about us. So important conversation, and we have a lot of leaders in the room. We're all on our own mental health journey, and my hope as you leave today is you have a greater appreciation of the intersection of those two topics, leadership and what it means to be taking care of the entirety of you. And with that, we have two panelists that I want to thank in advance, and I want to provide an opportunity. Many of you know Dr. Stanley and Matt Jensen, but provide an opportunity for them to introduce themselves before we go ahead and get going. So Matt Jensen, why don't we go ahead and start with you? Why don't you tell us your story?
Great. Well, a little bit about myself. I've been working at Vance Thompson Vision for almost 20 years and have really grown up there. I'm now serving as the CEO there, which takes up a little bit more than 100% of my time professionally. And then about a decade and a half ago, was encouraged by them to use what I had learned and had a passion for in the marketing realm to start my our own marketing agency, MJM, and so we do work here in Sioux Falls, and about half of our work is out of market, but it's largely healthcare, nonprofit, gospel-oriented messaging with a little Main Street work as well. And between that and some other kind of side entrepreneurial things, those are the things that really take up my time professionally. But my mind share is really wrapped up in what I get to do at a little acreage outside of Sioux Falls with my bride, best friend, and 20-year roommate, Beth Jensen, and our three girls who are all teenagers. And so that's just a little bit about me. I'll get into a little bit of the story and my journey a little bit later on.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Matt, for being here. Dr. Stanley.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Matt Stanley, I'm a psychiatrist with Avera. As Tony said, I've been with Avera for over 25 years. Actually returned to South Dakota in about 93 to complete my psychiatry residency here, and then became employed shortly after that. So I'm a psychiatrist. I'm board certified in both general psychiatry and addiction medicine. Work with our residency program, and as I think Tony mentioned or Cindy mentioned, also medical director for our inpatient facilities here in Sioux Falls and Aberdeen and Marshall, Minnesota, as well as our addiction facility here in town. And then kind of our most recent and interesting challenge, a joint project called The Link with City of Sioux Falls, County of Minnehaha, Sanford Health System, and Avera Health System. And that's unique in that it's first of all, that joint venture, and it's been, I think, very successful, but it engages many people who have a hard time finding services. So it's a sobering center, a detox center, and a psychiatry urgent care kind of concept. I guess much like Matt, I've raised my family here a little longer than you, Matt, but as I said, I've been working with Avera for over 25 years, been married for 35. My youngest is now a 26-year-old, hard to believe, but two of my children live here in Sioux Falls, and two are as close as we can get them. So very close family. We also, I think, have our heart in our lake cabin and just try to plow through the rest of the week until we can get away and enjoy ourselves. So.
Well, thank you both, and as you can tell, both very busy. I appreciate you being here, and also appreciate how you feel pushed and pulled in different directions. We'll talk about that here in a bit. Let's first set the stage by talking about the state of mental health. As a community, state, and nation, at a high level, Dr. Stanley, where are we at right now?
Yeah, well, and you mentioned the pandemic. So everything is changing very rapidly. It did change quite a bit over the last 2 years. And I know you've all heard snippets of that, some more than others. But the stressors that we encountered over the pandemic are unique, maybe certainly in our last century. But so the impact, I think, of on the mental health scene, we haven't fully realized. We know some things. In the last 12 months, we were over 100,000 overdose deaths in the United States. So that's a new high. I think WHO indicated that across the world, anxiety and depression had increased by about 25% worldwide. We had the highest number of alcohol-related deaths in 2021. So there are a lot of negative indicators, particularly in regard to suicide. We were already in an epidemic, just as we were already in an epidemic of opioid and drug overdoses. And what we found was isolation and the stresses, economic and otherwise, of a pandemic certainly didn't help those stressors. Our suicide rate here in South Dakota, we are unfortunately almost always in the top 10 of the United States. I think most recent data about 2020, unfortunately, the data is always a little bit slow in coming out. We were 8th in the nation, have a suicide rate of about 22 per 100,000. I think it was around 183 suicide deaths, somewhere in that ballpark. One of the hardest things about talking about suicide, though, is in the United States, it's the second leading cause of death between the ages of 10 and 34. And I think when you say that number, second leading cause of death in our youngest, our brightest, our greatest potential, that's just tragic just on the face of that. But it's also one of the concerns is that's one of the areas where we're seeing the highest raises in the suicide rate. And some trends that are also concerning younger women. When I was a resident, as I said, 25 some years, a 10-year-old female, a suicidal ideation was as rare as hen's teeth, just rarely saw it. Unfortunately, now it's not terribly uncommon, and that is, in fact, one of the fastest growing demographic groups for suicide, that 10 to 14-year-old female. Their numbers are still not exceptionally high. Obviously, any single death is tragic. So there is a long way to go. I think there are some positives, though. I think the pandemic raised awareness. I think that we've done a lot in this community. I mentioned, Sanford and Avera, along with city and county, having a joint venture in this area. Janet's here, 988, a brand new, universal suicide support line. And we've got, I know, some ventures coming forward to help, I think, publicize around that and allow better reach out. Beth Jensen's here for physician wellness. Beth recently has started working with South Dakota State Medical Association, and it kind of ties into what you're going to talk about, Matt. I think it is interesting that sometimes those that we would expect to have the most resources and the most ability to care for ourselves are sometimes the last to reach out for help. So I'm looking forward to your story.
We're going to come back around to talk more specifically leaders and some of the tools that are out there and some of the things that leaders are going through. But you talked about awareness, and Matt Jensen, I want to move to you. You've had opportunities to build teams, whether it's 5-4, whether it's MJM, for sure, Vance Thompson Vision, 350 employees across the upper Midwest. You've been on that journey for 20 years. Talk to us about the other journey that you've been on that you've recently had an opportunity to share with those that you work alongside.
Well, thanks, Tony. And thank you, Dr. Stanley, for giving us that picture of the whole. I kind of dumb it down to a couple of simple things to remember when it comes to substance abuse. 1 in 10 are walking around with some kind of active addiction in their life. 1 in 5 is walking around with some kind of medical style anxiety. And as leaders, I think it's easy to believe that tension is not less when you rise to the level of those in the room, but perhaps more. And so it might be even higher amongst all of us, right? So I think it's a worthy discussion. I appreciate the backdrop. So maybe just to share a little bit of of my story and the story of our family. First I'll tell you what I'm tempted to do is attempted to just want to hold back a little bit and reserve just enough to where you will all feel a sense still of respect, and so I would, remain employable in this town, respected in this town. And there's nothing in my past that I think makes me not that, but I just think that there is a vulnerability when it comes to talking about this particular ailment, in my case, anxiety, that maybe it's Midwest, maybe it's being a farm kid, maybe it's being an executive that has a little bit of imposter syndrome, maybe it's all of it, but it just feels like I'm just going to lay up a little bit. I'm not going to take it all the way in, but I'm going to really try not to do that today, and maybe give you all a picture of what I think is really at the heart of, at least in my heart, and maybe in the hearts of some of you. I heard a quote one time that was said that if all we do is imagine that everybody we encounter walking around in today's society is carrying something that's almost too much to bear, the only thing that we would be is right. And so you wouldn't know that by looking around or by ringing the bell or by singing the songs we sing here. But I have, in all estimations, a very charmed life. Everything is going great. Model job amongst model employees and teams and great leaders and high culture, high functioning. And yet, as things have mounted in the past, some of my own tendencies, my own fears have been kind of revealed. And I feel like it's analogous. A friend told me of just taking on so much, swimming deeper in the water to where you can still stand and you can still say yes to everything. And you can still breathe because your mouth is just above water. And so you're good. And so you feel like you can take on more and more and more. Yet when the storm comes, you'll drown just because it's just above where you can breathe. So really, I'll use my own professional background as the backdrop to kind of tell this story. And what we have at Vance Thompson Vision is an organization that's certainly the envy in our own industry, the eye care portion of healthcare. But I think also in healthcare in general, because it is so team-centric. We've got some team members here today who are responsible for having such an incredibly high team culture with incredible values of excellence and committed and fun and egalitarian, caring. Those are our 5 values that we say that we hire by and we fire by. And that's so important. But when something goes wrong, then the question that you ask yourself, not that's asked by others, but you ask yourself is, what would have happened if I would have been just a little bit more committed? Or what would just a little bit more excellence look like? And you can almost weaponize the values to showcase your own inadequacies. And you can believe that more and more over time. And it can introduce, in my case, just a real high amount of self-loathing that coincides with the imposter, the imposter syndrome. Well, in the last 5 years, we've gone from 100 employees in one site to 7 sites across 5 states and 370 now employees, and still a great culture that Entrepreneur Magazine writes about, and we're proud as punch. And somewhere along the way, at least for myself, it just became just too much. There's so many spinning plates you couldn't get to it. And I think that some fears that already existed in me, I don't think it happens from outside in my case. You can correct me clinically if I'm wrong, but I think that fears that were already in me, I think really manifest themselves then and play out in real time, and I become more chipped, more certainly more irritable. Anger comes out, and also just a lot of isolation, right? A lot of just running as hard as you can, 12, 15 hours, and then just going home and collapsing and not giving your best to the people you care about most. Well, you know, in my case, I'm surrounded by a lot of people who love me, and it was really clear to them that I needed to just take a break. And people around me started to say, "Hey, do you ever think you should just ask for a break, just take a little time off?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." I mean, the last thing I want. I mean, this is what keeps me going. This is rocket fuel for me. Is running at this kind of pace. And to this day, I don't think I would have asked for that kind of break. But what the realization that really brought it to a T is when the doctors, my leaders, and the people who own the company that I'm privileged to work at sat me down and said, "Listen, we love you, but you're grinding too hard, and you've been doing it for 20 years, and we just want to give you time, just to reinvest in your family, to go just get centered again." And just on hearing that, I almost collapsed. You're just so relieved that it was hard to hear. Even that, I wanted to weaponize. Like, what are you saying? You don't need me? You don't want me? And that wasn't the case. It was that we want you, but more importantly, we want you healthy with your family, and then we want you back. And so I just finished month 1 of a 6-month sabbatical where they're keeping the chair warm, and they hope I come back more centered. And it's if you look at 12-step programs or other counseling programs, one of the last steps is there is power, and that it can be had in sharing your struggles with others, because suddenly it becomes something that we all get to carry together. You're welcome. And thank you for helping me carry it. But it's therapeutic to talk about it because it becomes then normal. It's normalized and not quite as insidious as it might be in the dark when you talk about those fears just alone. And so, I won't go into the stories about how, anger shows up or how irritability shows up. I do think that today, more than ever, it's harder to be an executive these days. And the reason that I believe that is because I know from observing firsthand that it's harder to be a doctor these days with all the expectations that I see firsthand. And I know that because I see that it's harder to be a teenage girl these days than ever before. It just seems like the world around us is it's swirling in a fashion where people who want to be of right mind have to really do battle to keep truth at the center. And so that's what I observe in my own home with my wife's profession and my teenage girls who it seems like anxiety and depression are knocking at the door all the time, and we have to protect ourselves from it. And we do that by just trying to live centered in some of our beliefs. And I'll close just my portion with this, Tony, but one of the things that I find some peace in is this notion that, and it's been written about for a long time, St. Thomas Aquinas said that salvation comes when what you desire and what you believe and what you do are all in harmony with one another. But when they're not in harmony, there is tension. And in my case, tension comes out in the form of anxiety and depression. And because what I desire, the health of my family, it's my prized thing on this earth, is in conflict with what I think I need to do for my own professional well-being and of my own doing. And so that's what I'm working on right now. And I hope it's a story that resonates with all of you. And I appreciate you creating an environment where I can talk about it.
Thank you for sharing your story. I think some of those things are things we all feel as we're on various boards. We want to be really good in the community. We want to be really good at work. We want to be really good at home. And there's only one of us to do all those things. And I appreciate you articulating that, Matt, and sharing your story. And we're going to come back to you. I want to go to Dr. Stanley now and talk to us. You talked at a high level, suicide, anxiety, depression. Talk about leaders, healthcare professionals, those that you see a lot. You're Avera, Sanford are taking care of the entire person. You specifically are taking care of what's between our ears. Talk to us about what you're experiencing that more recently.
Yeah, well, recently we're all aware the challenges have changed rapidly. Burnout itself, if you want to call it that, and you could call it, where's the line between burnout depression, anxiety disorder, and does there even need to be a line, because they all kind of meld into one thing. But it's interesting, burnout wasn't even really recognized. It's a fairly recent kind of point of discussion. It's been there, I think, forever, but I think there's no question as well that research into burnout indicates that the levels are rising, the statistics are increasing. Beth, you shared the other day a statistic that I have read before. We were talking about physician burnout. And, I think one of the things that's tempting when you talk about people and their struggles is to think that it wouldn't happen to me, or I'm a more resilient person. But I think one of the statistics that I found really telling was going into medical school, students are, through these rating scales, more resilient. They are actually healthier and stronger. But once they're into medical school and certainly into residency, their burnout rates far exceed the normal population. So the environment you find yourself in and the stressors that are pressuring you impact the strongest of us. And I think as leaders, it's really difficult to acknowledge that. There are many challenges with the pandemic, but one of the things that keeps coming up is workforce. And I think as we, as organizations or as leaders, are trying to hold on to our workforce, we're more aware of wellness. But I think there's still a little bit of hypocrisy there, in that we see what we need to do with our workforce, but rarely apply it to ourselves. It's a little bit like we were talking about physicians. Physicians are great at advising wellness, just not always great about following. And I think you'll find that in many people. You talked about that burden of responsibility. If something needs to be done, and I'm paraphrasing, Matt, but you just keep adding it to your shoulders. Or if no one's able, it's very hard to say no. There's also just kind of the control factor that I know I can do it better, or I know how I want it done. Very hard to set limits, and particularly if you're trying to grow your career. And
or if you just want to, sorry, in my case, you just want to remain the man. You've been doing good for so long. You just want to keep saying yes because you love it.
Well, we're a competitive culture. It's even when you're on the top, you're always thinking, somebody else is there waiting, or I could get better. And what's interesting too is sometimes that you mentioned your commitment to your family, but it's very easy to rationalize that stronger at work, I can provide better for my family. So you start to reject the principles that you're actually got you started in the first place. You become so focused on this goal. And I think that's one of the things that I see with leaders. And then there is just that pride. You mentioned just being your community presence, and you jokingly said your employability. But those are all factors. And we see it in physicians as well. And I'm sorry I keep referencing physicians, but I see that that's become a hot topic for us as well. Concern about employability for us, licensure, there's a whole lot of issues when you acknowledge that problem and that sense of vulnerability. So I think, oddly, those that are capable of probably tapping into the most resources are the least willing to do so. So we kind of, we talk about those social determinants of health, people that don't have an air conditioner, or don't have those. And it's very valid, and we have to address that. But the irony of it is, many of the people that have the most resources and the best social determinants of health are the last ones to ask for it, at least in the mental health arena.
You've been at this for 35 years. How do you compare this last 24 to 30 months compared to your prior 32, 33 years?
A few silver linings in a very dark cloud. So I think that the conversation has become more open and honest. People like Matt having the courage to come up and speak about this. I do see the conversation changing, and I'll give you a really cogent example. But when we built our behavioral health facility in 2006, if you're aware, we built out there south of 1929 next to the Heart Hospital. That was our first behavioral health hospital. Our philanthropy said, we just can't raise money around behavioral health. So we didn't even go that route. Here we are in 2022. We just finished that 4-floor expansion, essentially raised $24 million totally through philanthropy geared toward mental health. Now, a lot of that I have to thank the Helmsley Charitable Trust for, but that's a sea change right there. The fact that not only are people willing to talk about it, and we're willing to market to it and create an entire fundraising effort around it, but the people came forth, because the reality is, you said 1 in 10, 1 in 5, means that every single one of us have a family member, a loved one, a personal story about addiction or mental illness. It touches every one of us. So it's amazing that it stays so far under the radar. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question more relevantly, I think, we're coming out of the pandemic, but the world just doesn't seem as comfortable and safe. And, now we have financial recession issues. We're still not sure we're totally out of the pandemic. And our kids are struggling. And I don't think anything worries any parent more than how well their children are going to do. And when we see the stresses on our children, and we literally, it would be a discussion unto itself, but we opened Pandora's box with the social media outlets that we have, and no one has the answers to that, and no one has any idea how to corral it. And so as a parent, I think, let alone, how it changes our lives as adults, but to conceive of how it changes our children's life and the impact it has on us. So, those are stressors, some related to the pandemic, some not. I think what we saw was the power of social media during the pandemic, because it was the influencer of our children. And what we also learned was, when you remove our children from that school environment, how important as a community support our schools are, and what a safety net they are. Mm-hmm. So when our kids were removed from that, and kind of the watchdogs weren't there, and there was less structure, and they were given more time on social media, I think that's a large part of how we saw this change kind of evolving in our country, about this increases in anxiety and depression. Other factors, certainly a multifactorial mm-hmm. problem, but that's a few of the things that I think we learned from the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll come back around and talk about what we're doing as a community to thwart this. And as Rotarians, we want to shine a light on an important topic. 1 in 5 of us are going through something. That's a whole lot of us in this room. Let's go back to Matt. You talk about vulnerability, and thank you again very much for sharing your story. Normalization. In conversation with you, you shared with your team openly and honestly, like you just did with us. What has the reaction been? You have some of your team members here, and now you're gone for 6 months. Maybe talk to us about since you've shared and been open with your team, what that experience has been.
Well, thank you. The ones who are relieved that I'm gone haven't approached me, but a lot. I think that what we fail to realize as leaders is that sometimes, all times, we need to model good behavior, right? But one of the things that I think we often disregard as leaders is that good behavior also means admitting when you're wrong publicly. So your team or your kids or your family, that they can see that they're, we can't be expected to do everything right. And when we're out of line, that you're willing to, raise your hand and say, that was me and I could have done better. I use this analogy a lot, and it's hard for me to use it because I'm a wrestler. I grew up a wrestler, but it's a basketball analogy. But it's remarkable to me that there's a sport where, on purpose, there's set aside a way for people to raise their hand up to 5 times a game to admit their mistakes, and it's well known and almost expected to get to 4 but not 5 follows. Well, we don't do that in the business world. We don't do that in leadership in general and say, that's I wish I had that one back. And it would be nice if leaders could model that better. And we felt like it was an appropriate thing for us to share with our team, and to do so in a very transparent and honest manner. And so we've got a little system where we like to communicate with our team, and we can send out texts or videos. And I just made a little 7-minute video talking about, much like the story I shared with you, with a little bit more detail for them because they're almost family. just on kind of the last few years and what the doctors have invited me into, and how I have responded to taking that time, and that I hope to get more balanced, and that it'll be okay. And the amount of team members who have approached me since and said, "Hey, so who do you talk to? You know, what do you do? How did you first raise your hand and learn?" And I wish I had something to say like, "Well, when I raised my hand, I didn't. I had to have people around me point out that maybe you should, maybe you should talk to somebody. Maybe you should take some time." But it's been a joy that I didn't know that I would have to have them approach me and say, "I think I could use some help like that too." And it's been an overwhelming response from them. And I'm happy to share with them, my counselors' names. Frankly, if I could afford it, everybody I love would have a counselor, just to talk through things with the very purpose of, you have got an hour to just talk about whatever you want to. But the team response has been really, really positive. And so I know they're going to watch this later. They're in the middle of surgery, but I wish more of them were here to hear this message and to know that it's okay to want to get better at this and to have a more balanced life.
I know you mean a lot to them, and they're cheering you on, and grateful that you're willing to be vulnerable and share.
I will say that, as part of this time, and this isn't part of my sabbatical, but we've been hosting goat yoga at our hobby farm, and the team especially organized their own event to come and see me and do some goat yoga, which is its own kind of bonding and anxiety relief.
If you have any questions on that, we'll have a Q&A period towards the end.
I don't know if you've written any prescriptions for that, but it's not covered.
But I do want to get back to that. This is a period where we've been through a lot as a world. We've seen, whether it's in ourselves or others, the need for encouragement and help. Talk to us, Dr. Stanley, about warning signs, tools. How can we be better at identifying and encouraging, whether it's ourselves or someone we love?
That's a great point, because I think we do have a hard time acknowledging, and even once we acknowledge, to take that step and move forward. So I think some of the simpler things to identify are physical symptoms. Poor sleep is probably paramount, whether it's anxiety, depression, or this kind of burnout and stress. And it's not only a symptom, a sign, but a symptom. And in terms of your ability to recover, if you're not able to sleep, that's when your body and your mind particularly restore yourself. Yeah, anxiety, you mentioned as well. I think with burnout itself, some of the classic symptoms are a feeling of cynicism, the belief that no matter what you're doing, it isn't good enough or doesn't matter, and a numbing, an emotional numbing. Things don't, you don't refresh, you don't renew, you don't come in with a lot of verve and vigor. So I think those are a few of the things. You talked about moods and irritability and anger. We could talk about classic depression signs. There's inability to concentrate, but it's also loss of enjoyment. You essentially feel like all you do is work, go home, try to sleep, go back to work. Life just doesn't have any balance to it. So I think those are some of the symptoms. And then some of the things you can do, we talk about self-care, but we really don't engage in it very well. And I think self-care, there's some truly evident ways that we talk about all the time. Exercise, absolutely a great way to kind of get in your own head, but also obviously give yourself physical renewal. But beyond exercise, it's that ability to actually separate your work and your home life. I think what's really difficult with responsibility is it's with you 24/7. So even when you're not in the office, you are still thinking about the problem of the day, or you're still waiting for a call. I would say one of the things that I've said has really contributed to burnout, I think physicians in particular, is our increased ability to be contacted has really reduced kind of the critical thinking skills of all those under us. Rather than somebody solving an issue, they just call and they get someone else to solve it. That's not a criticism of them. We encourage it, but it also means that there is no downtime if you have a lot of responsibilities. But even without that ability to be contacted, you have to have a way to separate and tell your body and your mind, now I'm not working. So one of the interesting techniques that I've heard is it's called like the Mr. Rogers procedure. So you remember Mr. Rogers, he used to walk in and he would take off his jacket and hang it up, and then he would take off the sweater and put it on, and then the music would play and he'd walk in. Well, that was his moving from his work boundary to his home and relaxed boundary. So it actually isn't a terrible technique that you come home and take your sport coat off and put on your favorite sweater, but anything that just tells yourself a pattern, a habit that says, I am relaxed now, I need to not think about it. The other thing, and this is human nature, this is maybe more so in America, 70% of the time, statistically, we think of the negative aspect of an event. The reality is 70% of our life isn't going wrong, but that's where we focus our thinking. So there are, we talk about things like gratitude journals or practicing gratitude. They seem simplistic. They're actually, through research, shown to be effective. So I think it's reframing your day and your frame of mind. Mindfulness, we often talk about. That's just the ability to almost just be present, to give yourself the ability to just feel and without judgment, kind of evaluate where you're at in the moment. One of the things we also don't allow in this increasingly, email, phone calls, text, we rarely get into deep thinking. We're almost always just skipping over the surface, answering emails, returning texts, returning phone calls. It's very nice if you can set aside some time at work, an hour or two, that you block out so that you can actually focus and concentrate on problems you're trying to solve. Because we essentially do, we're putting out fires all day. We just jump from one thing to the next, really never delve into what we would say solution-oriented deep thought that gives us a sense of completion and closure. So I think those are a few of the things, a few of the symptoms, a few of the techniques you can try to employ.
It's great, helpful for all of us.
To add one thing to what you said, Dr. Stanley, the mode of communication is so important. And I found through the pandemic, we went from being very accessible to one another to being even more accessible. We looked at it like it was the Super Bowl of leadership, and I'll circle back to that in a minute. But we never kicked the habit once that was done. And so texts come in during church. Texts come in very late at night because they happen to be up, and the expectation for those who are doing the work is that they've got to respond, right? Because of the same belief system that they have. Well, we finally ruled that we're going to try to control when and how to use each media. And so if it's something that's work related, it should be emailed, because everybody's got crazy hours, and it's not like we want you to not express your thought or wishes. We want it. We just want to deal with it as team members during business hours. And so if you have something like that, please send it so it's logged and that idea or desire is caught, but we'll cover it during work. If it's a joke or something just fun or family oriented or an emergency, that's what we use text or mobile phones for after hours. And that way, we're not texting at 10 o'clock saying, I just happened to see our spot run in the wrong spot, on television or what. I mean, that's not actually a text I got, because I'd be the one sending that text. But now that's reserved for email, and it just is. It sounds so trivial, but it just allows team members who are reporting you to get that balance back in life. And we, Beth and I have talked a lot in our lives about how sometimes we don't even eat when we eat. We're doing something else, or we're reading something, or we're not present. And the real rhythm of life, that we used to have, and it's seasonal, or that's set by meals, or set by Sunday with not working, or all these different things that, we've lost some of that. Last little plug is that, there's this incredible book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which really convicted me about how I rest. And it is, there is relevance to me, at least, that it's a sabbatical, and that there is a Sabbath, and that there is time that's supposed to be set aside for just deep thinking, for deep rest. And that's what I'm using that time for. And I'm encouraging our team to do the same.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you both for insight. Let's talk about, we've talked about a lot of the challenges or the issues at hand. Let's talk about hope, what our community is doing. We got an amazing community. Dr. Stanley, you've been part of some of the work with Sanford, the city. Maybe talk about our response as a community.
Yeah, I'm always encouraged by Sioux Falls. Just always had the attitude that we'll find a solution, and everybody comes to the table when there is a problem. And I think we're recognizing the problem, so we are pulling together a lot of resources. I mentioned Janet Kiddam's here with Helpline at 988. So there's a big that just launched, and we're pushing out a lot of media around that. So I think that's an incredible improvement. Within the Community Health Improvement Project. So, it's got a fantastic leadership core, some folks from Sanford, Avera, city and county, really looking at, so every few years we have to do a community needs assessment. Mental health is almost always one of our top community needs. And they prioritize some areas that we're going to be working on. And one of those is mental health and awareness and suicide awareness. So at a community level, again, the Avera, Sanford, city and county working together. I think you'll see more about that. That committee is just kind of wrapping up some of their recommendations. I know September is suicide awareness. We're going to be launching a big campaign. Lindsay Myers is here. She doesn't want me to say too much. She wants to have the glory. But no, sorry, I'm just kidding, Lindsay. Anyway, we will be, no, I think that will be an incredible opportunity for us to engage in these kind of conversations. And then, I would say our involvement with the school, I've just come to respect. As I said, the pandemic, if nothing else, I always respected our teachers in our school system, but that was an eye-opener for me, just how much we require that support system in our communities. And when you take that away, boy, you feel it throughout the community. So we are working more closely with the school district than ever.
We talk about leaders. The teachers are leading our children, so
yeah.
Their mental health is imperative. Talk about Light. What you're doing to take care of those that have been through trauma in our healthcare field.
Yeah, so the Light is an internal program to Avera, and it's for our medical practitioners. So there was so much trauma to medical providers. I'm not just talking about physicians. I think the ICU nurses, the respiratory therapists, all the folks who, shift after shift, and as our workforce declined, people just gave more and more and got burned out. But Light actually was in existence before that, but I think has more relevance than ever. So it is our approach internally to wellness, the opportunity to have confidential counseling. You can be referred to a physician for medication if you need it. But as you said, most of us just need someone to talk to at an appropriate time. And so the Light is a very strong provider and practitioner support system. We have our EAP system as well. As I said, Beth Jensen, a physician, is here from SDSMA, and we have a physician wellness program now that's been started through the South Dakota State Medical Association. So those are a few of the programs that are going on. I think across the community, Eric Muckey and Lost and Found, I think he's been here as well, working with our college-age students. So there are a lot of folks turning their attention to this and putting their talent into this area.
Yeah. It's great to see the resources that are being mobilized to address this. Matt, you sought out care. Talk to us about that experience and any advice for Rotarians, either for ourselves or for those that we love.
Well, I have to tell you, Tony, that one of the most important things to do is to capitalize on that basketball analogy, because if we're not careful, we'll all run our merry way and get after our Monday and still get in our 60 hours this week, and we'll have had a good Rotary session. but we won't apply anything to our lives. And I think that there's a lot of folks, if the stats are right in this room, who could benefit from it. Now, for me, that looked like first talking to some, men that I'm close to, some of which are in my church, some of them are in other churches, but we have a small group together now. I wasn't part of it before, but I just, confided in a couple of them, just saying, listen, I could use some, I could just use somebody to, bounce these things off of, the stressors of work, the stressors of family. And they invited me in to be a part of their group, and they were grateful that I raised my hand. I'm reminded of a story of someone, who's known in the community whose spouse passed away and slowly began to isolate himself, and confided in one of his friends. He said, I just feel like I don't have any friends anymore. I don't, have any loved ones anymore. Since my wife left, she was kind of the social chair of our household, and was slowly slipping into kind of a depression. And he was challenged by that friend to say, we're right here. We didn't know you were struggling. And that friend then included the rest of the friends, and he's been circled in. And I just think that, you look at this room, right? And you look at the four-way test. The people in this room, this is a good example of how we can confide in one another and find help just socially without having to get into the programmatic side of things, which we should do also. But that's how I did it. That is first it took me admitting that I just needed some help. So,
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We have a couple minutes here. Questions for either Dr. Stanley or Matt Jensen. We have a traveling mic coming your way.
Hi there, Steve Williamson. Matt, good to see you. I guess three of the words that I keep coming to that we've kind of circled around but haven't come up yet is the role of perfectionism, and how perfectionism drives shame and guilt. And we see that a lot with alcoholism and drugs and things that sort. But I wonder if you two could talk a little bit about the role, and especially with social media, how that really drives perfectionism, but talk a little bit about perfectionism and how that drives shame and guilt.
I might let Dr. Stanley talk about perfectionism because I think that's a real issue. But I will talk about the word of shame. I think in mental health, shame is the most insidious part of it. That's addiction. That's other mental health. When you don't perform to a level, or even you just think you don't, while people are praising you, you just know you could have done better. Shame is the darkest of the feelings that you have because it's isolating. Maybe you can talk about perfectionism.
I think it's I appreciate you bringing it up. There's so much to be said about that. A couple of things, though, a couple of comments I want to make. Perfectionism, I mentioned that 70% of the time we're seeing the negative perspective of what's going on at the time. Our internal dialogue so often is critical of ourselves, and for the perfectionist, it's almost 100% of the time. Doesn't matter what's going on. There's a downside to everything. I try personally to tell myself, don't say anything internally that I wouldn't say to a stranger I met on the street. At least be kind enough to myself as I would be to somebody else I don't even know. But I think it's very hard, and the perfectionism drives so many, the anxiety, and it becomes a physical thing. The cortisol levels, your adrenaline, it's stimulated by those thoughts and by that desire to be perfect. So the social media you mentioned, that's become very clear that it's a tremendous driver of mental illness. That idea that you see the beautiful, the perfect, the perfect vacation, the perfect day, everyone's perfect life is out there on social media. And study after study on social media has seen that people that look at that with depression or anxiety just can't help but compare themselves to that. And of course, they always feel like they're inadequate and not doing as much as they could, not living their best life. It's a huge driver, I think, and particularly onerous with the social media and the young people who probably don't have the perspective. It happens at all ages, but I think when you're young, you just don't have the perspective to put that into the right frame of mind.
All said. One more question, Jack.
I'm Jack Marsh, a member of Downtown Rotary. You're used to me asking a lot of questions here at Rotary Sessions. I don't have questions today, but I just want to thank Matt Jensen for making this a safe space to be frank with one another, to have a little vulnerability. Thank Dr. Stanley for his wisdom and guidance. I'm the proud father-in-law of Matt Jensen. So when he talks about his family, he's talking about my family, our family. And I hope that what we have achieved today is that we're all maybe a little more vulnerable and a little more willing to raise our hand and care for one another. That's really what this is all about. Anxiety, depression, addiction, those diseases do not discriminate. They don't care about your socioeconomic class. They don't care about your background or anything else. We have an epidemic on our hands, and as caring, conscientious human beings, we have an obligation to raise our hand, or if we see someone else is struggling, to reach out to them. So I just want to thank Rotary for providing this safe space to have a very sensitive conversation.
Well said, Jack. Well said. Thank you for that, and thank you, both of you. Any final comments?
I just had one last clarifying question for Dr. Stanley, and this is more clinical in nature. You mentioned sleeplessness and things like that, but when is rapid hair loss a symptom of of anxiety? Because it seems hasn't lost a sense of humor. We appreciate these two, and we appreciate you. And I think as Rotarians, we look at the four-way test, caring for those in our sphere of influence. As leaders, we take that responsibility, and we put a heavy weight on that. We're always giving, but the opportunity to also reflect, to make sure that we're treating ourselves as well as we're treating others is important. And thank you for helping us shine a light on that important topic. So with that, I'll invite Cindy back up to close us up.
My goodness, what a gift you gave us all today. I saw and felt this room lean in, and I couldn't be, again, more proud to be a downtown Rotarian. So I extend my gratitude and thanks to all of you up here as well. Our next program, August 15th, we will take a look at our retail landscape with Raquel Blount, with Ryan Tisdale, and it will be moderated by Jody Schwan. Thank you all for coming. Rotary is adjourned.